That we had to cancel our November meeting. Our speaker that we had planned for that evening on artificial intelligence unfortunately had a detached retina and could not move his head. And then several of our board members were sick with a flu-like ailment and didn't feel up to scrambling at the last minute. So we just canceled, and I apologize for that. But we have a great program for you tonight. We have Rachel Frazier from the Maryland State Archives. And Rachel has a master's degree in library and information sciences. And she first started working at the library as a intern on a grant for study of the legacy of slavery in Maryland. She is now serving as the Director of Reference Services and has been there for 16 years. So I guess she must like it there. And I'm glad she does because she's been of immense help to us. But she helps visitors with needs historical, genealogical, and legal. Rachel is the recipient of the 2024 Ancestry Leadership Award and makes archives accessible and welcoming. And, and her goal is to make the archives accessible and welcoming. And I think she does a great job of that. But tonight she's going to talk to us about land records. And I think personally, I think the land records is the best part of the Maryland State Archives website. It's certainly the one of the easier aspects of it to use for me. So, Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Eve. I'm so excited to present to everyone today, and we're going to be covering land records and a few adjacent records because I know sometimes it can relate to equity, probate, things like that. So we're going to try to cover a few things to help you troubleshoot, and I really hope you have get a lot out of it. Because this is not a gigantic group, I've presented to like virtual groups where it's been like 100 people. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in during the talk because you're welcome to raise your hand or just unmute and ask a question. That works just fine for me. So let's get started with, there we go. Jump right in here. So at the Maryland State oh, and again, yes, I'm Rachel Frazier. I'm the Director of Reference, and we're lucky to be building a team of specialized reference archivists, which is fairly unique. We're very lucky to be able to start building that team and have the funding for it. In a time when funding is difficult for archives, and we're always here to help you with your research problems. So these are going to provide you with tools for researching land records and records that are adjacent to land records that may come up when you're doing that research. But I'm also going to be putting up our email at the end of the presentation so you can get in touch with us. This email is triaged to reference, so either myself or one of our team will be happy to answer any questions. And at the Maryland State Archives, we are the central repository for state government records of permanent value. We are located at 350 Rao Boulevard in Annapolis, Maryland. 21401. And if you type Maryland State Archives into your browser, our website will come up with directions, information about visiting. But we're especially going to be focusing on records that are available online remotely outside of the archives from home. And so I mentioned state government records of permanent value. So what are those? Those are mainly vital records. So birth records from 1924 and earlier, so historic birth records, death records over 10 years old, and marriage records generally over 10 years old. We also have probate records, which are records of a person's estate, a deceased person's estate, land records, court records. We have tribal records that have been donated, military records, historic legislative records, and more. We also, however, have something we call special collections, and those are records of permanent value to understanding the state's history that are not government records. And those can include newspapers, maps, photographs, religious records. We can have letters, historic scrapbooks, and more. We're not going to have time necessarily to touch on these, but it's really important and helpful to know that these exist. These are based on donations We're very aggressive in working with government agencies to help them, politely aggressive, in helping them establish retention schedules to determine how to best preserve records so that we can ensure they're there for people in the future. But we're never going to be pressuring someone to donate a private collection, or tell them how to preserve it or anything. That's really just voluntarily done. Although we do a lot of community outreach to be a helpful resource to anyone who needs that assistance. And we have a beautiful search room, like I mentioned, in Annapolis. And we recently renovated the search room space so that it has ADA compliant tables. Um, and they also meet standards for the Society of American Archivists of having much more elbow room for researchers to spread out. So we're very excited about that. And we have an ongoing goal to get more and more of the records in our holdings scanned and online from home, starting with ones that are over 100 years old. And the reason we've targeted that is there is no chance that a social security number is going to be in one of those records. So as far as limited funding goes, that's a good target to have. And in a single day, we can teach a brand new visitor how to search historic death records, how to search land records. We might help a job seeker get a copy of a court record. We might need to teach a student how to research Revolutionary War military records, or even help a veteran's widow obtain a copy of their marriage certificate for veterans benefits. So the job of the Reference Services Department is to connect researchers to the tools they need to solve their research problems. And we each have our own specialties, but that varies. And we don't have quite enough staff to have a specialty for each record type. So instead, we train our staff to be excellent problem solvers. So even if it's a record type we've never seen before, we can problem solve with you to learn what that record means and how to interpret it. So, unlike Google or Ancestry, we don't have a cumulative database to type a name in, or a subject in to see everything we have in the archives on it. Instead, we help you determine the specific collection that you're going to want to start searching, such as that collection's indexes and things like that. So, we provide a lot of advice and brainstorming. So, because it's challenging, this is why we're creating something called research guides. And these are by topic. It could be on land records, probate records, equity, vital records, that will guide you through these collections. We can't create them on all of them, though that's our goal, of course, our dream. So right now, we're creating them on the top used records. And now we are currently working on improving our land records research guide. So until it's where we want it to be, you have a handout on land records. I've put that in the chat. And if you're a member, you also got it by email. So that is the PDF that's in the chat right now. And we're going to start with land records and then move on to talking a bit about equity records and probate, which will relate to land records as you research them. I do want to make a quick note before we start going through land records do want to make a quick note before we go into land records that we have a brand new website. Now, it's really the website information, everything is still the same, but they've been focusing a lot on accessibility, ease of use. And so this is our old website. We now have the new website. And it has a new mobile version, so that's a little bit easier to use on an iPad or iPhone. And also for accessibility purposes, it's set on dark mode, but you can toggle it to light mode. So much more accessible than it was before. And so let's get started with land records. So there's a few ways to access mdlandrec.net, which is the land records resource that gets it online from home and accessible. So on the far left of our homepage, you can click on Maryland Land Records, or you can type in mdlandrec.net and it'll bring up the homepage. We're going to touch on a couple of things. And this is very similar to a workshop that I taught in person a few weeks ago. But I'm also tailoring this with a few examples also specific to St. Mary's County. And we're going to cover, how do you trace property backwards? So if you're doing historical research, it's helpful to know how to trace it backwards. We're also going to talk about reading some of those challenging historical indexes. So we'll start with tracing historic property backwards from the present day. Now, the first step when you're at mdlandrec.net, and actually, is everyone with me? Any questions feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. Actually, I have to say I would prefer it if you unmute mute because I just realized I can't read the chat when I'm sharing my slides. So yeah, if you have any questions, just unmute and jump in. Okay, so we're at mdlandrec.net. We're going to select St. Mary's County. Now, one thing I want to mention about St. Mary's County land records before we go any farther is one thing that can affect historic records, including land records, is courthouse fires. Sadly, there are counties that were affected by that. It's not always necessarily arson. A lot of times it's just, unfortunately, wooden buildings being a tinderbox. And St. Mary's, sadly, was affected by this. In 1831, there was a courthouse fire that affected the St. Mary's County land records. Now, these are just land records like deeds, mortgages, etc. It did not affect patents, and it did not affect anything filed at the state level. So, like patent records, which are surveys that also include naturalization information and immigration information for early settlers. These are specifically the county level records. You'll notice that the index only goes back to what they were able to save back to 1827. Now, if we wanted to search historically, let's say we wanted to take an historic property that perhaps you know where an ancestor lived, but some other family lives there now, or perhaps it's development or something, and you want to trace it backwards, you actually can do that by address on mdlandrec.net. Well, through a related link that we're going to give you. So let's go to related links. That's up here at the top of the page, or click on related links. And it takes you to the State Department of Assessment and Taxation's real property search. Archaeologists use this a lot, genealogists, students, archivists use this a lot to try to go backwards and see what are the names of every individual landowner. And you can eventually trace it as far back as land records exist for that county. And sometimes you can go a little farther if you can find if you find the name of a family, even if land records didn't all survive, you might start searching probate records or court records and keep going farther back. So let's see how this works. If you click on SDAT, State Department of Assessment and Taxation, real property search, that will take you to a new website. So that is their own website. And so what you'll do is you'll select the county, and we're going to select St. Mary's County, and we're going to select street address search. Now, the street address, I actually decided to use as an example the Leonardtown Public Library in St. Mary's County, and they're located at 23630. And they don't, and for this search, you're not going to put street, avenue, road, or any of that. So we're just putting Hayden Farm. And when I did that, it actually gave us this fairly unintuitive database. It's not very intuitive what you're going to get here. So if you ever use this, here's the trick. All we really want is the current deed for a property. Because if we can find the current deed, that current deed, if we pull it up, will help us trace it farther and farther back. So where is the information for the current deed? And that is actually on the far right under owner information. It just says deed reference. The first number, which is 3287, it doesn't say it, it's kind of not intuitive, but it's actually the book number. And then 576 is the page number. And this is on the handout that you have. So all of this is going to be there because it's really challenging and it's not that intuitive. So all we have to do is take the book and page, go right back to MD Landrec. And what you'll see is under the St. Mary's County land records, we have, and this is going to be everywhere when you're looking at MD Landrec, no matter what page you're on, it's always going to give you the option to plug in a book and a page. So now we actually have a book and page from that, and that's the current deed. And if you plug that in, you actually can find the current deed. Now, if you're doing historical research, you may not be that interested in the current deed. A lot of times, like genealogists, archaeologists, the only reason they're pulling this up is to find a reference to the previous book and page. And this is going to be on the handout, the PDF that was either emailed to you or is in the chat. A really great word to look for when you're doing properties, a property search, a title search going back historically, is the phrase being the same. And it might be said a little differently depending on who's writing it. But in this case, it's actually the very bottom of this deed, being all the same land conveyed unto the parties of the first part by, and it's actually giving two deeds. So it looks like it was two pieces of property that were sold at the same time. Book DBK 263, page 180. And you're going to see them being kind of fancy and using Latin a lot in these. So Liber is just Latin for book, folio is just Latin for page. So it's Liber or book, DBK 263, folio or page 180. And there's, again, two pieces of property being sold at the same time, and we have the second book and page. So ideally, you can actually do this going back year after year after year, every single time that property is sold. So you can get back to the 1800s, 1700s. And the nice thing about this is, we do work with title searchers, real estate agents, all of that, but it's especially used by genealogists and historians who really want to get the names of the owners. Because once you've got those names, it can reveal so much about history. So the great thing about this is once you have the book and page, and I usually keep a list, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or just a notepad next to me with a pencil, keep a list of those books and pages so that because it's so easy to lose track of them if you're going back pretty far. And you can just keep plugging them in into the jump to new volume, which is on the yellow toolbar at the top. So we always put that there. And you can just keep going farther and farther back and just plugging them in. So that is a really great skill to have. I'm not going to trace it back any further because I want us to cover some more things on land records, but this is in your handout. And one of the reasons that we're going to talk about probate and equity records is because in a perfect world, every single deed would reference the previous book and page, and you would just do a straight line all the way back to the first settler. Unfortunately, there are going to be deeds that you run into when you're trying to build your family history or the history of a property, where all of a sudden it no longer tells you the previous owner or the previous book and page. It doesn't say anything. Usually, if that happens, it's because the property was inherited, like through a will or an estate, or it was perhaps the subject of like a property dispute and it was auctioned off or sold through the courts. And those, it can feel like a dead end. But if you have those in your toolbox to say, oh, there's no reference to the previous deed, let me check probate, let me check court records, you can pick up that land title and keep tracing the history of that property and those families. So that's why that's going to be included. But we're going to stick with land records a little bit longer. Okay, so that is how you're going to trace land backwards. Any questions before I move on to the next type of search? Okay, and again, do not be afraid to
Yes.
interrupt me.
Are the plats
Yes.
also recorded along with these deeds, or do we find a plat someplace else?
So that is a very good question because I find the plats are recorded on plats.net. And if we have time, I will pull that up at the end of the presentation, but they are recorded on plats.net. Now, what I will say though is plats.net is good at viewing the plats when you have a book and page already. You can like a plat often has the name of the land, like the tract. It could be like, Hunter's Folly, or just one of my favorite names is Bellyache Thicket. They usually have names for the land, but sometimes those names change or they're spelled different ways. So searching, or even like the owner's name may be spelled different ways. So I find that searching plats.net by the owner of the land or the name of the land, it's hit or miss. So the nice thing about MD Land Rec is if you're searching these deeds, now it's not going to always reference the plat, but if it's been resurveyed, anytime the land is resurveyed, they're going to mention the book and page of that plat, of that drawing of the land's boundaries in the deed. And again, it's not necessarily going to be every deed, but if you keep doing that chain of title, eventually you're going to find it's recorded in plat book, say like 1 page 52, and you've got your book and page. You'll have to leave this website and go to plats.net and plug it in, and then you can view it for free from home. Any other questions? If we have a chance at the end of the presentation, I'm happy to pull up plats.net. But right, so separate website, but really good to look for those plat references while you're doing the deed searches. So let's talk about some of the historical indexes that you might be searching. Because if you're it's great to be able to know how to trace the land back from the present day, but what if you have the name of an ancestor or historical figure that you want to search and see what their activity was? And that is a really great use of mdlandrec.net because, it can give you the business transaction they had, but a lot of times if you're an historian, a genealogist, an archaeologist, you want to see who they're interacting with in their lives. And so if you're looking at mdlandrec.net, like we have found names of spouses that we had never found any other record of because they're mentioned as a spouse in a land record, especially if it's someone who passed away and then they remarried. We've even found names of children we didn't know about because they're buying and selling land between parents or other siblings. So it is a gold mine for historical research. Another reason to search the historical indexes by name is they also record for many counties manumissions, as in someone purchasing freedom from slavery or receiving that freedom. Or it can also include certificates of freedom, which is the note someone would have carried to prove that they were not enslaved, that they were free. So there are so many things you can find in land records that are so valuable. So let's go on to searching those historical indexes. Now we are on version 3. And just a reminder, I unfortunately cannot read the chat myself because I'm sharing my screen, but if you have any questions, just unmute and jump in. We are on version 3.9 of MD Landrec. They are working on version 4.0, and I'm excited that one of the updates they're going to be making. There's a lot of updates going on. Some of it's for security. A lot of it is also for user friendliness. So feedback we've had from our wonderful researchers like yourselves, we've passed on continually to IT. And so one change that's very little, but to me is kind of huge. Active indices is actually the link for historical indexes, and it even says that on your cheat sheet, that your handout that I sent. It says that active indices are the historical indexes. That is because if you went to the individual search, the searchable, the text searchable database only goes back to about the 60s, 70s, sometimes 50s, depending on the county. And it's very misleading because it looks like that's where land records stop. And you have to click on active indices to get to the older scans that you have to browse for historic indexes. No one's going to think of clicking on active indices. So they're going to rename that to actually say historic indexes, finally. So this will only be like this a little bit longer. So when you click on active indices, it is going to take you to what we saw earlier when I was talking about how it only goes back to 1827 for the county. These give you all the historic indexes in existence. So let's say that we wanted to look for, let's see. Yes. So let's say that we wanted to click on 1827 onward. And we're going to look for Thomas Dayborn, Daborne, from in like the 1800s. So 1827 to 1907, we can click on that. And when this index comes up, it looks very unusual. Now, I took a screenshot because I scrolled down to D. This is not very intuitive, and it's an historic index file you're going to come across a fair amount. We're going to cover two of the really weird ones. So this one has tabs on the side. If the scan did not capture a tab, we're going to put a title card so you can see that it's D. But this one, we actually can see the tabs. So these are actually last names beginning with D. And along the bottom, and it says M, it's going backwards. I still do not know why they made this decision, but it's A through M. They just wrote it backwards. A through M first names, all for last names beginning in D. And if I look at the other page, so we got A through M. Let's go to the other page. We've got M through Z first names. This is all for last names starting with D. And so this row is just first names. It is really, really feels like someone was, I don't know, thought this up in a fever dream or something, but it made sense to the clerks at the time. And so we run across a lot of records as reference archivists, um, where it made sense to the clerk at the time in their day-to-day lives, but they didn't think about how confusing it was going to be hundreds of years from now, especially because many counties follow their own thing. So one county might do it this way, might do another way. So if you ever run into an index where you're struggling to make sense of it, there is on the right side of MD Landrec, send image feedback. And you can literally just send us a message and just say, I'm not sure what this index says. Can you help me? And when you send a message through MD Landrec, it sends us the exact page you're looking at. So that is a good advantage of sending it through here. Now, if we're looking for Thomas Dayborn, we're already in the D section for last names. There's the T section for first names. And anything for him is going to be on pages 189, 190, and 191 for any transactions. So that is one type of index. The other type of historical index you're going to come across a lot is a little bit easier to use. And so let's actually use, whoops, let me skip past this. Went backwards on accident. There we go. Let's use Anne Arundel County as an example because they use this other style. And you'll see with a lot of other counties too, just in case your research pulls you into some other counties. So if we go to Anne Arundel, and we're going to look for someone whose last name is Stinchcombe because it's a fun last name to look for. And so that's going to be SM through SZ for S Stinchcombe. ST falls right in there. And this is a very common screen to see. I find it to kind of be sensory overload, but there is logic to it. So the way it's organized is for very common last names that appear a lot in the land records. They're going to give them their own page. Let's zoom in here. So there is Stinchcombe because it's actually a pretty big Anne Arundel County name that appears a lot. So they just gave Stinchcombe page 65, gave it its own page. But if you don't find the name you're looking for on this main section and it's just not appearing, that is why all other names get organized into the section on the right. So we'll see page 15 has all remaining names that start with STA, STB. That would be weird. Page 17, anything start with STE. 19 has STI through STN. So if Stinchcombe had not been a really common Anne Arundel County name at the time, it would not be on 65. It would have been on 19 if it didn't have its own page. I still find it's one of those things that's really hard to wrap your mind around until you do it a few times. So again, feel free to reach out if you get stuck. For these indexes, I found it was really just repetition and getting used to it. Okay, so and again, it worked really well for the clerks at the time because they did it every single day, but they didn't think about what was going to be easy for researchers hundreds of years from then. Okay, so let's actually pull up page 65.
Excuse me, Rachel.
And did I have a question? Yes.
Yeah, I had a question. I was taking notes on the last thing you said, and I missed the page before this where you had Stinchcombe. Can you go back one page or two?
Let me back up. So what we're doing, okay, so we go to Anne Arundel County.
Yeah.
And you know what? That was my bad. I forgot to do a screen grab of active indices. That was what we clicked on next, just like with St. Mary's. So I did accidentally skip a step. Clicked on active indices, pick the right time frame, and then just pick the correct section for the last name.
So this being a grantee index has it by name, by alphabet.
Right. And so we tried it. So I've noticed that some only give you the time frame and then you're dumped right into A through Z.
Okay.
Thankfully, some counties will give you the first few letters of the last name, and it really varies by county. Okay, so when we go to page 65, because Stinchcombe got its own page, we actually get an entry for Nathaniel Stinchcombe's, oops, let me try to zoom in. There you go. For Nathaniel Stinchcombe's heirs, and it's really faint, but what it's saying is it's book NHG number 2, and it's page 553, and this is from 1853. So I'd mentioned earlier that there's the gold bar at the top of MD Landrec where you can click on jump to new volume, and that's always going to be there for you. So again, I try to keep a list of any books I'm interested in. If you're looking for Stinchcombs, you might want to write down all the books and pages you're interested in, and then start plugging them in. Now, these letters, they're often the initials of the clerk who was creating that book. So NHG is under the clerk's initials. Under the jump to new volume, we put book number 2, page 553. And what's really great about MD Landrec is we get to pull up that actual deed from home. So you can go right from the index to the deed itself. Deed, indenture is any transaction, often meaning a mortgage, but it can mean almost anything for a transaction. It's not doesn't not always mean that it's an indentured servitude situation, although it can. But an indentured servant is indenturing their time, for a certain number of years, and their labor. But an indenture is, again, it could be a mortgage, could be any land transaction. So you'd have to read more details to see what's going on. And so you're going from the index to the actual record, to find Stinchcomb. Any questions? Now, if we have time, I do want to show some of the patent records, early settlers indexes, things like that. But I do want to show you some adjacent records as well that we're going to. And I also want to mention, so what I was showing, this is how you also are going to get to the indexes we were looking at. Let me actually back up. There we go. So indexes like this, if you're looking for anything in the land records, these are the master indexes. So any kind of transaction, it could be a deed, a mortgage, a manumission, a certificate of freedom. I've even found one person buying and selling a plow with a neighbor. So you can find so many relationships there. I was doing some research for one grant funded project where we even found a father selling land to his son for $1 because he wanted to formalize it. But you're also getting some more of that, like the good relationship they had. So you're starting to learn more and more about these families. Any questions before I move on? Okay. Looks like we're doing good time-wise. Okay, so even though I'm going to talk a little bit about equity and probate, this is related to land records specifically. So it's not going to dive completely into equity and probate. We could definitely do a workshop entirely on probate, entirely on equity. But this is, again, how it relates to land records. The reason I pulled this in is this is actually modified from some training I gave to the Maryland Society of Surveyors. They actually requested training on equity and probate relating to land records because they were finding when they were researching land, running into situations where there is no reference to the book and page previously. They might have found that someone they're researching seems to have dropped off the face of the earth. So if you're doing land record research, if you run into a brick wall, going to probate records and going to equity records can help fill in the blanks for land record research. Okay. And it is really great. Sometimes you can conduct your research completely in land records for a specific family. But in my experience, we still tend to run into at least once where you're hitting a brick wall. And so we'll have people come into the archives and say, I've done all I can on MD Landrec, on looking at plats, looking at MD Landrec, and I just can't get past this one record where there's just nothing else. I don't know what happened to this person, their land, any of that. So that's where I and our team, and my team, we will say, okay, we're going to help you look at probate indexes, try to figure out what happened to the person and the land that way, and look at equity indexes. And so equity specifically is non-criminal records. It can include divorces, adoptions, foreclosures, land disputes, name changes, anything non-criminal. And we use it a lot for solving land disputes and foreclosures, auctions, all of that. So just a quick little intro to what that is. Okay, so let's, it also can include child support. So, and equity goes by different names throughout history. You might see in a land record, you might even see a land record blissfully referencing an equity case to look at and saying this land was sold through equity case number blank. If you see that, you can actually either place an order with us or you can come into the archives to view it, to actually see the equity case, to pick up those clues and continue your research. So, again, like I mentioned, sometimes it doesn't reference anything, but we're still going to, it usually is because it's for equity or probate that they were recording things. But every once in a while, it will actually tell you that this is related to someone's estate or probate. You would think that the clerks would be really good at saying that all the time. A lot of times, I think it was just to them common knowledge, and it was not considered, oh, we should have written this down. That this, you have to look at a completely different record type. So equity can go by different names: equity, chancery, civil, somewhat interchangeably over history. In a modern legal sense, there are different definitions, but historically, there a lot of times are used interchangeably. And so let's actually go into a few examples. Okay, so oh, that's right. I do want to define one thing, but before I do that, you're probably wondering why I have these weird looking, they're actually rectangular ice cream cones. And you're probably wondering why they're on the screen. Does anyone have any guesses of why I'm showing these in relation to equity records? I probably would not have guessed correctly when I first started here. So these are part of an equity case. They're exhibits. It is actually part of a patent dispute. And these are rectangular shaped ice cream cones that were two companies were fighting over. The idea was that you had a rectangular shaped ice cream scoop. So you'd scoop out a rectangle of ice cream and slot it into that rectangular shaped ice cream cone. This was apparently a craze for a little while, to the point that it got to court. And I love the fact that equity records can be so many things, and you're getting so many pieces of like the human experience through this. And if we talk about equity records, there are different types of equity records. There are dockets, there are records, and there are papers. Now, the way this is listed, each one has a little more information than the last. The docket is usually like maybe a third of a page, maybe half a page of just basic information: when a case was opened, what it's relating to, the people involved, and a case number, if there's a case number assigned to it. And then there's the equity record, which is actually a multi-page narrative summary of what happened in the case. And lastly, there are the equity papers, and those are basically a case file of loose papers. And it can have the most information on a case, including, and this is why it's really important to know about equity papers. If we find an equity case number, that usually means there are equity papers. And as long as they survived, we have actually found property surveys, the plats, in equity papers. What can really make that a treasure trove is sometimes the filing of the plat. If the plat didn't survive with the court, sometimes we've actually found copies of plats and equity papers that did not survive anywhere else in history. So it has solved some really tough land record research problems. We always try to start people off with the equity papers because it's the most informative. If they didn't survive, which happens, not commonly, but it happens, we will then look at the equity record for a in-depth narrative description of what happened. If the equity record didn't survive, we go to the docket. So we try to start with the most information and work back as necessary. So let's look at our research guides. There is not a handout for this one because we now have a very thorough research guide on equity records that is online. So we're going to our homepage, clicking on research guides, and this takes us to the reference and research page. If you scroll down, there is the equity, civil, and chancery records. We say that because there's so many different names for it. We want to pull people to the right research guide. When you click on it, an example I'm going to give is Anne Arundel County, but there you can click on every single county here. But if we click on Anne Arundel, it takes you to indexes, at the top half, and then the actual records are listed in the bottom half of what survived. Okay, so for the example that we're going to use, okay. So if we already have, let's say we start with having a case number. This is going to be best case scenario because I mentioned that deeds will sometimes actually say this land was sold through this equity, or they might say chancery or civil case number. And unfortunately, sometimes they survive and sometimes they don't. So let's say we went to the actual equity papers. Okay. We're pulling up the equity papers, and this is going to be a case from 1919. However, when we look at 1919, one thing you're going to notice is that only certain cases survive. And so when you're looking at equity papers from St. Mary's, from Anne Arundel, anything, there might be gaps. If that happens and the case number you need is not there, like I mentioned, we're going to back up and we're going to try to find the docket or the record that has a narrative description. Okay, and hold on one second. I just want to make sure I don't confuse people anymore because it's already confusing. Okay, let's back up. There you go. Back up here. Let me actually go back to that. Got it. Okay, so back at this page, if sometimes it survives, sometimes it doesn't. I just confused myself because I'm trying to cover a lot of ground. I don't want to miss anything. So let me back up for 1 second. So if it doesn't survive, we're going to try the equity records or equity docket. If it survived, you're going to notice that there's no link. That is because, although we're very thankful for the funding we're getting, we don't have enough funding yet to scan all of the case papers. So you would either go to our homepage and click place an order to order a copy, or if you wanted to come in to view it, we could pull it for you. And again, if you're unsure if a case survived that you want, just email us. We'll check for you. But what do you do if you're looking at a land record, you've hit a brick wall, there's no reference to the previous book and page, you're striking out, you can't find historically what happened to the property, or if a person just kind of has disappeared from land records and you're not sure what happened. We can actually search the indexes to see what we can find. So let's go to our indexes next. So the indexes are very similar to what you see on MD Landrec, but they're usually a little bit easier to use for equity records. So these are organized by time frame and last name. And as an example, let's look for W for Wells. Let's use Wells as an example. And so if I go to 1852 to 1991 for W, these indexes, thankfully, are just alphabetical and by last name and then kind of chronological. So we can find an entry for a George Wells for and it says regarding TR, and that's trust, estate 1919, and there's a case number we can search for. So 4374. And so again, if we found this case number in land records, we could have skipped the index. But if you don't have a case number, you have to go to the index, see if one exists, because you're hoping that that's going to explain why it's not in the land records. And it also does give us highlighted in blue, book 6, page 244. We would only fall back on that if the case number did not exist. You also could check if hold on 1 second. Yeah, if the case number did not exist. So let's what you would do is you'd write down the case number. You'd either come in or place an order. Another thing I want to mention is that while you're waiting to either come in or receive your order for the case papers, you still might want to check to see if there's an equity docket that's been scanned, because that can give you a little information, because even though we don't have the funding to scan the case papers, we are working on scanning the docket books. So you have a little information. And so I checked and found that book 6, page 244 was scanned. We are able to scan books a lot faster than we can scan case papers. And so the nice thing is the writing is not great, but you have information that you can study from home that will explain what happened with property. And it even verifies the case number. Now, as you can tell, there's a lot of steps, a lot of types of equity records. It can be very confusing. But again, I'm going to show our email at the very end of the presentation if you have questions. And again, I would say this is for when you're striking out with land records. I know we're moving a little quickly because I want to squeeze in a lot about these land records and problem solving. But any questions before I touch a little bit on probate? Okay. Let's move on. Just for the sake of time, this is just an example of how, and I'll mention this very quickly, but in the docket, it does give a different book and page because the equity record, which is an in-depth narrative description, has a completely different book and page. And if you find that, it can fill in for things if, like, the papers didn't survive. You get a lot of information about property. It mentions deeds. It really can be helpful if they decide to record things about the land records in the actual equity records. But let's actually mention also as well the chancery papers. I mentioned it's called different things: equity, civil chancery. Chancery papers are an older term, and these go back to 1713. So you can actually view these on site. And the thing about chancery records, again, it's just another name for equity. You can find land information, names of tracts, all of that. Like this mentions a tract named Piles Delight. And it even shows a survey. So again, keep that on your radar. They're not the easiest things to search. Searching equity records is very challenging. Reach out to us if you get stumped because we're here for you. Okay, so quick mention of probate records. I'm hoping we have time to talk a little bit about patent records and early settlers if we have time. If not, I'm putting my email up if you have any questions. But I want to mention probate records in relation to land. So wills written by the person who is now deceased, inventories of property, administration accounts of who got what, and then estate papers they can have all of these in the original form together, as well as deeds of property, original deeds of property, plats, surveys, and things like that. Excuse me one second. So you would especially be interested in the inventories and the estate papers. Now, we have probate records for mainly the early 1900s all the way back to the colonial period, though it really varies by county to how recent we have them. And we do have research guides, which you can get to through the Probate Records Research Guide. I'm only going to touch on this briefly, but I do want to highlight that you can get to the links to each county. Click on St. Mary's County. And the example I'm going to use is from the colonial period. But this is very much like with equity records. If you strike out with land record research, or you're tracing backwards historically and you're hitting a dead end, a lot of times land was sold or given through an estate, and that one transaction is not always referenced in land records. And so it can help you pick that trail back up of researching the land records. So let's just look at the colonial one. What I love about the colonial period is there is a single index that covers all counties in existence, including St. Mary's. That includes references to land, deeds, things like that, that would not have survived the courthouse fire. So if there's a family that owned land in St. Mary's County and the deed at the courthouse burned in 1831, if you can search their probate records, you might find a deed, you might find a survey. It can fill in a lot of blanks. So just a quick example, let's look for Thomas Dayborn again. And so when you go to the index, it covers 1634 to 1777. So it's just a colonial index when we were still under British rule. And when you click on D, we can find Thomas Dayborn in the wills. He has ended up being filed in Anne Arundel County. But the nice thing is, when you're searching, this covers, again, all counties in existence. And it says he's at book 4, page 32. Now, this is completely outside of MD Land Rec, even though it can include land information. So you have to use that probate records research guide to then say, okay, I found a will, a book and page for a will. Let me go back to the research guide. We're going to go to wills, and you can actually find book 4 from 1682 to 1688, and it is online from home. One thing I'll show you is, back up for 1 second, if you see the notation available online, that means it's online remotely from home. If it's not online from home yet, it'll either say available at the archives search on computers, or it'll just, if it's scanned and on the computers, but just not pushed online yet, or it'll say visit the circulation desk, which means it's just the paper form. But we have pushed most of the main collections for colonial probate records online from home. So we're looking at book 4. I like to click view images individually because it loads a little faster as kind of an ebook. But if you click view wills, it loads as a multi-page PDF. And we're just going to select an image number. It's not a page number, it's just the number of scans. And you can then view the actual will. And we've been able to solve a lot of property issues and mysteries by looking at the wills, inventories. Some people actually die intestate, which is without a will. But we can look at inventories of property to see if property is mentioned. And as long as the estate papers survived, we might find, again, like I mentioned, surveys, references to deeds, references to family members, and who received what. So definitely keep equity and probate on your radar because it is so helpful. We squeezed in a lot of troubleshooting for land records, especially the main kind of more advanced troubleshooting that we try to help people with the really tough stuff you run into, tougher indexes that you need to search, different techniques you can use, as well as how to search equity and probate when you're at a real brick wall. But if you have any questions, let me know. And if it looks like we may not have time to touch on the early settlers index, but I just want to mention that when you go to our research guides, if you click on land records, there is a link that says patent records. And patent records has an index that will give you, patent records has an index that is going to actually give you a way to search for anyone who was one of the early settlers, early first European settlers in Maryland, that you can search. And it'll give you names of people who immigrated here, paid for passage of indentured servants. And they're called patent records because you were the first European settler to purchase land from Lord Baltimore and pay for passage of indentured servants over. It's recorded as a land record. So it's really helpful. There are so many types of land records and so many troubleshooting tips that we could easily do an hour or two on each type. But I hope this is giving you tools to really tackle the tough research and land record difficulties and untangle those. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, let me know. And feel free to unmute with any questions.
I was going to read the questions that were in the chat to you, and then you can.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, we have one. Does the archive have any records on transported convict servants that arrived in Leonardtown, Maryland?
That often would be in the patent records. So you'd want to search that early settlers index. So actually, hold on 1 second. I'll put the contact information back up in a moment. But let me actually change what I'm sharing because I'd like to pull up the website live. I'm going to reshare this.
Maryland, Chris. That's in the chat. It's London Town.
London Town. Oh yeah, London Town is a great history. And sometimes you'll also find references of this in court records if there are issues. You might even find it in some legislative records, but the main place you're going to want to look, is this all showing up for everyone?
Got it.
Okay, perfect. So you're going to go to research guides. Now I mentioned we're still working on our land records research guide. I want to actually make my screen a little bigger because it's there. That's much better. We're still working on the land records research guide, which is why I gave you the handout. But if you click on land records, there is a deep dive into understanding Maryland land records and their history. But if you go to patents, it's the first transfer of land to an individual, most commonly by Lord Baltimore to a colonial settler. And that includes references to people who were brought over as indentured servants, whether that was voluntary or due to a crime they had committed. And so the first step, there's two steps. There's the patent records indexes, which is just a name index that's going to give you a book and page. The second step is the patent records themselves, which give you scans of every book by that book number. So let's go to early settlers. And if I were to type in, for instance, like Johnson as a last name, this is very broad. I want to zoom in a little more so we can really see this. Now, this is kind of like that very first thing I showed you of searching a property by address, how it wasn't very intuitive for the book and page. This isn't entirely intuitive either. So the way it works, this is a wonderful resource that transcribes the Early Settlers of Maryland, which was a published volume, and it gives the names of individuals. Now, in this, for instance, we have Aaron Johnson as the first example with a full name in Maryland by 1683. And it gives us, now this is where it's not entirely intuitive, but just look for this colon, and it's actually book WC, book WC4, that's the book, page 425. So what I would recommend is all you'd have to write down is that book number and page. Now below this, there's an Abel Johnson, and it has different terminology. It says transported by 1682. And that implies that someone who was an indentured servant, whether it's voluntary or due to a crime, that's someone who came over as an indentured servant, most likely, by the way it's indexed. Though, of course, if we look at the original record, we'll know for sure. And that gives us book W4, page 258. So all you really need to note is the general date range and the book. So why don't we take book, I'm actually going to jot this down. We're going to do it right now. Book W4, and then we'll go to get to the next questions, I promise. WC4, page 258. So all you have to do now, and this is a fairly recent development in the last couple of years. We'd had this index online for a long time, but getting the actual patent records, which again is the transfer of property to the first settler, and it documents indentured servants coming over. That is only within the last few years that we finally got these online. So we're very excited about it. And we actually are going chronologically. So it starts in the early 1600s. It's going roughly chronologically and by book number. So we want to get to the 1680s, first of all. And we want book WC4. And let me back up a little bit. There we go. Oh, I wonder if you know what? I always pick my examples in advance in case you run into some odd things. It looks like they renamed some volumes. You know what? Let me pick a different example for this demo. What I would say, if you run into what I just ran into, you would email the help desk and let us know that you can't find the corresponding book. And we would dig in and find out what it was renamed to. So we can solve it, but I don't want to hold you guys back. So let's use a different example. Probably will be trying to solve this tomorrow, though, to see what it's referring to. That's one issue with an older index. So why don't we use book 3, page 383 for Albert Johnson? Let's just stick with that one by 1687. And so, oh, sorry, by 1657. Okay, let's move this out of the way so I can get here. You know, when I share my screen, I can see all of your lovely faces, and then I actually was hiding, there we go, hiding my link. Okay. Book 3, page 383. Let's just do that one. Okay, so we can see, now book 3 is very easy to find. Falls in the right time frame. There's book 3. If we click links, you're going to be able to pull that up from home. And if it asks you if you want to download it, it's a really large file, but yes, it's going to load the entire patent record for you to be able to view it. And so once that's loaded, you actually have the book, the page that you want to go to, which is pages 383 to 384. Okay, and I think because we're coming up, we're already at 8 o'clock, we're not going to have time to do this thoroughly, but Just wanted to make sure you knew how to get to it. So you've got the index, you found the page number, you have to go down to patent records and you can actually pull it up. So those would be the resources. If you strike out, please email us because we can brainstorm further and see if there's anything else that could help. And do we have any further questions?
The actual next question was kind of led into what you were saying. Do you have a web page like the National Archives called the History Hub? And they have a link, historyhub.history.gov, welcome, where researchers can post a question on a website and an archivist will answer the question on various topics. Thank you.
So thank you for that question. We don't currently have a question to post to a way to post to a web page. We just don't have the staffing for that right now. But what I do recommend is, let me reshare this, is if you go to our homepage and you click on Contact Us. So click on Contact Us, that'll get you to our contact information. I blew that up here. It's msa.helpdesk, which is one word, at Maryland spelled out.gov. One thing we are doing, however, is if we see common patterns in the questions that we get, we are trying to work those into our research guides, into our FAQs, so that we can make that information more accessible and easier to find for people. Thank you.
All right. Barbara Jones asked, really enjoyed your brick wall sessions. Any plans on future or another brick wall session?
I think that would be wonderful to have. We don't really have the staffing resources for it right now, but I think that would be lovely. And actually a lot of the staff that were working on the brick wall sessions, we've now been diverting our energies to creating better research guides. But I would pass that on because I think that would be a lot of fun to have those again. And I hope we can get to that point staffing wise again.
And one last question in the chat. My ancestors were in Maryland prior to 1800, Somerset and Worcester counties, Maryland, and Dale and Sussex counties in Delaware. Is Maryland land rec the application to use? Thank you.
Right. So even if the land changed as far as, being Delaware, Maryland, if the land originally was in Maryland, you still want to search MD Land Rec. And that will help you. So searching mdlandrec.net by the county it originally was in. And that's a really good place to start. And again, also you might want to try probate records. I wouldn't even worry about equity records right away. I would try land and probate for that time frame because not a lot of government records exist during that time frame, but between wills or accounts of who got what or inventories of property in the probate records and the little footprints they might have left in land records, I would try those too, especially for that time frame. Another thing I would mention is trying to reach out to local county historical societies because sometimes they might have other collections that were not donated to us of non-government records, whether it's family histories, family Bibles, things like that. Never hurts to reach out to them.
I have my own
Rachel?
question. I was going to ask you that, and whoever wanted to go first, go ahead and hop in there and I'll wait. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Rich Rawson here, Rachel. Great presentation. I was last down to the archives probably about 8 years ago. Can you just give us a quick summary? And thanks for all your help. My question is, what sort of records have come online that haven't been online about 8 years ago? For instance, one of the records I'd be very interested in are tax assessments, especially for St. Mary's County. And I could only get to them by actually going down to the archives.
Right. Tax assessments are on our wish list. I know that one of the things they're trying to target. Now, I want to check one thing because I don't know if they've actually gotten to this yet. Are the 1783 tax assessments. And I know that's a goal for them. Right now, tax assessments, they are one of our largest and most complex collections. So that will probably not be a collection that goes online soon, but is on our wish list as well. And so I just want to see, I know that the index is available, but let me just take one look here. They have been working on trying to, okay, so the good news is you're going to notice for this, now this is just the 1783 assessment, and that's a pretty famous assessment after the Revolution when they were trying to assess all of the citizens in Maryland. what I'm really excited to see, and I know this project is ongoing, 8 years ago, you would not have seen the word links. However, there is an asterisk. So whenever you see an asterisk, that means the project has scanned it, they've put it online on our search computers, but there's probably still working on the server capacity to get it online from home. But if you
The
see that, that's a really good sign. So that means it will be going online from home. They just have to figure out the
Yep.
server capacity. So what I will do is I'll reach out to them because they always want to hear for having patrons requesting certain collections to prioritize first. And this is a really much needed collection.
Just one additional piece of information on the
Yes.
1783 tax assessments for all of Maryland. The Sons of the American Revolution has a link to all those assessments, and they are available as digital images.
Yes. And that's a
So you
really
can,
great resource.
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Pull this back.
Yeah, my question was, you guys used to do pre-COVID where you'd have like a Saturday where you'd have tent set up and you'd have all kinds of stuff going on and you'd have stuff
Oh,
inside and outside and those were really
yeah.
good, welcoming things. I mean, is there any chance that you guys are going
Uh-huh.
to get back to doing some things like that over?
Oh, we loved that. We lost a lot of funding. I mean, we're getting back to better funding, but we had a lot of cuts during the pandemic, so we don't have the staff right now to do that. But I want to say we're actually getting close again. What I should say is over the last 5 years, we didn't have the staffing to do that. But we are getting a little bit closer. So hopefully we can do that again. We didn't stop because we didn't want to do them anymore. We just didn't have enough staffing anymore. So yeah, they were our family history festivals. We had food trucks, we had tents, different seminars. We love doing that. And it's a great form of outreach. Until we can get back to that level again, one thing we've been doing is community preservation days. They're a little bit smaller, but we've started partnering with libraries where we'll send a few of our staff and we do advertise this on social media and on our website and everything. They're called Community Preservation Days. We have some outreach reference archivists like myself and conservation archivists where you can bring up to 3 items that you'd like advice on conserving for your own family history. This is not for donating to us, it's for you to hold on to for yourself, but you can get advice on how to take care of them. And everyone walks away with a box, gloves, folders, conservation equipment. So what we've ended up doing is trying to do smaller targeted events and outreach. So definitely keep an eye on our events. And we're also partnering with the Enoch Pratt Free Library in doing virtual lunch and learns. So some of those are things that would have happened at the Family History Festival, but we're doing them as individual events. But I agree with you. I would really love to get back to doing those wonderful Family History Festivals. So I hope that can happen again. Any other questions? Well, I'm so thankful to present it to everyone. You're such a wonderful society, and I leaving up the contact information for us. But you can also go to our website, click contact us. I realize I really threw a lot of advanced research at you because I know you're excellent researchers already. But I really hope it helps break down the brick walls of your land record research. And again, what I featured was mainly things that we found were a lot of pain points in research that I hope will help break down those brick walls. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you address it to Rachel, it'll be triaged right to me. I am out next week, but if you email the help desk, the first available person is going to respond to you. And we have, again, a wonderful specialized department that loves brainstorming, answering your research questions. And even though I gave you a lot of troubleshooting, there's always going to be something where you're still going to get stuck because research and historical records can be very fulfilling and strange. So always reach out with any questions. And I do want to mention if you visit in person, we're open Tuesdays through Fridays, 8:30 to 4:30. We're open the first Saturday of every month, unless it's a holiday weekend. And you can always just walk in, but you also can click on make an appointment on our website if you wanted to have up to a full card of records ready for you. You don't even have to know what specifically you want. It just gives you a chance to email back and forth with an archivist and plan your visit. So thank you so much for having me. Reach out anytime. Always love brainstorming your historical mysteries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was outstanding.
Great, Rachel.
My head is
Thank you so
swimming.
much.
Yeah, mine too.
Well, I felt bad. I almost felt bad that I was like, I need to squeeze the equity records in. And as I was like, oh my gosh, this is an overwhelming amount of information. So please reach out. It's a lot to take in. And we're always here for you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.